I first met Clara at a small train station on the outskirts of Portland. A young woman, maybe 26, with chestnut hair loosely tied at the nape of her neck and an old cello slung over her shoulder. Clara didn't stand out in a crowd, but there was something about her that made people glance back. Perhaps it was the way she sat in the corner of the platform, eyes half closed, savoring the passing sounds like a private melody only she could hear. Clara worked as a waitress at a cafe near the station. Every evening after her shift, she'd come out to the platform, sit with her familiar cello, and play a few classical pieces. No one paid her for those songs. But I once heard her tell a young boy who often wandered the station, "You know, sometimes you don't play so others will listen. You play so your own heart remembers how to beat in the right rhythm." That day, a man walked into the scene as if he didn't quite belong. Gray suit, polished watch, eyes scanning everything as if calculating its worth. They called him Mr. Barnett, the CEO of a tech conglomerate. Wealthy, sharp, and a bit arrogant, if I may say so. He was on his way to a major conference in the city. Mr. Barnett stopped when he heard Clara playing, not because the music moved him, but out of a kind of irritable curiosity. He asked, half joking, half mocking, "Are you training to be a street musician? Seems like your talent and your career haven't quite found each other." I remember Clara's eyes in that moment. Not angry, not flustered, just a quiet look, as if she'd grown used to that kind of polished condescension. She bowed her head and said nothing, continuing to draw out those soft notes like a river flowing under a bridge, unconcerned with who stood above it, so long as it could keep moving in the direction it chose. I don't know if Mr. Barnett ever realized anything, but I did. Clara didn't play to be applauded. She played so she wouldn't lose herself in a world that's become too loud and far too cold. I thought it would all end with a quiet glance and a few notes fading into the air, but it didn't. Sometimes people can't walk away until they've proven they're the one on top. Mr. Barnett, with his polished shoes and proud ego, turned back after just a few steps. It was as if something inside him had been pricked, not by emotion, but by the sting of an ego left unanswered. He turned to Clara, his voice tight. "You know, I've invested in hundreds of young people, and I can tell who has potential and who's just fooling themselves. If you were really as talented as you think, you wouldn't be slinging coffee in some rundown cafe by a train station." I sat across the bench, fingers wrapped around my teacup, not out of anger, but out of tenderness. Tenderness for people like him, those who've grown so used to measuring worth by resumes and titles that they've forgotten how to recognize the quiet things. The steady flames burning beneath the surface. Clara still didn't say a word. She simply stood, gently brushed off the hem of her dress and carefully hoisted her cello onto her shoulder. But instead of walking away, this time she stepped toward Mr. Barnett. Close enough to touch. Her voice was soft but clear, like a bell ringing at midnight. "You're right. I'm not famous. I'm not successful in the way you define it. But music never taught me to be better than anyone. It taught me to be honest with myself. If I gave up playing just because of a few doubtful words, then what was the point of all these years?" That line, I think it still lingers with Mr. Barnett like a small scratch. Not deep, but sharp enough to sting when brushed against. He stood there, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, like someone yanked from a rhythm they'd lived in too long. Clara turned away, her figure small beneath the shafts of sunlight cutting across the old train cars. But her back was straight, her steps steady, as if she was walking to the rhythm of something only she could hear. No one clapped, no one cheered. But the silence that followed rang louder than any applause, as if everyone there had witnessed something sacred they dared not disturb. And me? I just smiled. Because that day, I saw a young woman stand firm in the face of prideful wind, without anger, without blame, armed with nothing but her belief in what she loved. And if that's not a kind of strength, I don't know what is. Clara wasn't born into a privileged family. Her mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and her father passed away in a construction accident when Clara was just 8 years old. Growing up in a home where laughter was rare, Clara learned to listen to the little things. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the sound of trains passing through the old neighborhood, and most of all, the music playing from her mother's worn-out radio after each long shift. Music didn't come to Clara as a dream. It came as part of her. She couldn't afford formal lessons or her own piano, but every day after school, she would quietly sneak into the high school auditorium, where an old piano with chipped keys stood, and practice until the janitor gently reminded her it was time to go home. At 18, Clara moved to the city to study education, since the scholarship she received wasn't enough to attend a conservatory. She went to classes during the day and worked nights at a small Italian restaurant where customers often asked the servers to sing a birthday tune or hum a few old classics. And Clara, in her own quiet way, brought the entire room to stillness whenever she sang. But behind her warm smile and soul-soothing voice was a dream she had never dared to speak aloud. Clara wanted to live through music, not just during breaks or when cheerful patrons made a request. She wanted to stand on stage, under soft lights, singing the melodies that had nourished her spirit through the quiet, difficult years of her youth. Clara's determination wasn't driven by a desire for fame, but by a deep need to give back to music, the one companion that never left her, not even in her darkest days. And she believed that if she held on long enough, music would open another door, not to the glitter of the stage, but to a place where she could be fully herself, whole and free. That's what made Clara different. Not loud, not boastful, but steady and full of quiet power. She didn't seek recognition through words, but through every small act, every note she played or sang, as if the world might pause for just a moment to listen to a soul living in truth. The train was 13 minutes late, but to Clara, it felt like a lifetime. After being mocked in the waiting area, she sat quietly on the wooden bench, her heart hollow, like she'd just fallen out of a beautiful dream. That man, with his expensive suit and mocking smile, hadn't just criticized her voice. He'd touched something deeper, the quiet doubt she herself had once whispered in her own heart. But when the train finally began to roll in, Clara tightened her grip on the handle of her bag, the one carrying the sheet music she'd written by hand, and stood up. Not because she had healed, but because she knew. If she didn't step on stage tonight, she would let him speak over the voice inside her forever. The small theater was just a few blocks from the station, tucked inside an old arts district where iron chairs creaked and the stage was built from worn wooden panels. Clara arrived just in time. She didn't put on makeup. She didn't change dresses. She was still the same girl with train dust on her shoes, a faded coat, and eyes that carried bruises not yet mended. When Clara's turn came, no one knew her name. A few people flipped through the program, saw the unfamiliar name, and went back to their phones. But when Clara sang her first note, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She didn't choose a famous song. She sang one of her own, written on quiet nights when the city slept and her doubts crept in like fog. The music was simple. Her voice trembled through the first few lines, but as she kept singing, Clara found herself again. What she had endured at the station, the dismissive stares, the cutting words, all of it began to dissolve into each note. And then, as she reached the final verse, the one that whispered, "I don't need to be accepted. I just need to hear myself," a woman in the front row began to cry. Then another, and another. Clara finished the song in silence. There were no cheers, no blinding lights, just a full emotional stillness, as if the entire room was embracing her, quietly but sincerely. She bowed, walked off the stage, and for the first time that day, Clara smiled. A small smile, but a real one, because she knew what he said at the station no longer had power over her. After Clara left the stage, no one rushed to stand. The old metal chairs remained still, as if trying to hold on to the moment just a little longer. In that hush, you could hear every sigh, the soft rustle of tissue, and even the sound of your own heartbeat, gentle yet full of gratitude. A young woman in the back row stood up first. She didn't say anything, just quietly walked to the reception desk and asked, "Who is she?" "That song? It felt like it was written for me." Then someone else spoke. "I've never cried at a performance before, until tonight." The whispers began to ripple outward like small waves, not loud, but real and moving. There was one thing Clara didn't know. Among the crowd, the man who had humiliated her at the train station was also present. He hadn't come out of curiosity, not out of guilt. It was purely coincidence. A business associate had invited him to see his niece perform in the same show as Clara. When her name was announced, he barely noticed. But when the girl with worn shoes and quiet eyes stepped out, he froze. It was her, the girl who had dared to answer him back at the station, not with anger, but with a voice full of quiet dignity. The girl he assumed would disappear into some dark corner of the world, never to be heard from again. But now, here she was, singing. Every lyric, every note, without theatrics, without fanfare, sliced through the layers of pride he had wrapped himself in for years. He sat in silence. No one recognized the man who had once dismissed a young singer so loudly, now gripping the armrest of his seat, as if afraid he might fall apart in the middle of the music. He didn't understand why his throat tightened when she sang the words, "I don't need to be accepted, I just need to hear myself." And that scared him. Scared him because maybe, in all those years of wealth and power, he had forgotten that his own voice once trembled too, once longed to be heard, just like hers. After the performance, many people started asking about Clara. Her personal page, which had only a handful of followers, suddenly gained hundreds overnight. Someone had recorded her performance, posted it online, and added a caption. "She doesn't sing to be famous, she sings to be real." As for the man, he didn't return to the stage, didn't apologize, didn't send an email. But 2 days later, at a major press conference with the media, when asked about funding a music program for independent artists, he gave only one response. "I had forgotten the value of people who sing with their hearts. Now I remember." No one knew who he was referring to, but Clara did. And the important thing was, she didn't need his validation anymore. She had her performance. She had sung her truth. She had walked through the moment of humiliation and emerged whole. That night, back in her small rented room on the 3rd floor of the Artist District, Clara unwrapped the sandwich she'd packed that afternoon, now cold, and laughed. Inside was a note she'd written to herself before the show. "If today is your only chance, let it be real." And she had done just that. The train pulled away. But that makeshift concert hall, in the middle of the bustling station, still held its crowd. Clara stood silently at the piano, her heart still pounding. Not from nerves anymore, but because she couldn't quite believe what was happening. The applause hadn't faded. Eyes were still fixed on her, as if they were seeing something pure for the first time in a chaotic world. Phones came out to record. A little boy sat cross-legged on the floor, chin in his hands, watching her like he was witnessing magic. In the crowd, he was still there, the man in the gray suit, the one who had mocked her just hours earlier when he saw her carrying a keyboard into the station. "This place is for catching trains, not chasing dreams. Music won't get you into first class." Back then, Clara just lowered her head and said nothing. But now, it was music that had stopped everyone in their tracks. No one knew who she was. And it didn't matter. They were simply receiving something real on a day that had started out like any other. A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "You sang that? Like I was 20 again," she said, her hand still trembling. "Thank you, sweetheart." A college student turned to his friend and whispered, "This is the kind of video that should go viral, not the usual nonsense." As for the businessman, for the first time since he'd arrived, he said nothing. He stood still for a long moment, then turned to leave, only to pause at the door and glance back one last time. Clara sat down, still holding her keyboard, her hands trembling slightly. Not from the cold, but because everything was crashing into her heart at once. The old shame, the indifference she'd endured, and now, something that felt almost like hope. One of the people in the crowd was a freelance journalist, heading home after an assignment. She quickly posted a short video clip with the caption, "An artist dismissed just for daring to carry a dream." But that dream stopped an entire train station. Within hours, the clip was being shared widely. And as the internet often works, something honest and raw found its way into the hearts of thousands, long before the press could catch up. Clara didn't know that yet. She was still sitting at the station, sipping a hot cocoa from a vending machine, her hand resting on her keyboard like she needed to touch something real, to believe what had just happened had actually happened. Meanwhile, the businessman stepped into a private lounge and called his assistant. His voice was low and urgent. "I want to know who that girl is. Her name. Where she's from. Who taught her to sing." "What for?" the assistant asked. He didn't answer right away. He sat down, eyes staring through the glass as if at something far away. Then he let out a strange kind of sigh. Because I think I was wrong. It was the first time he'd ever admitted something like that. No one heard him. But that thought, like the first domino in a long, delicate line, began to tip over a chain of reflections and decisions even he hadn't imagined yet. Back at the station, Clara looked at the clock. The next train was about to arrive. She wasn't sure if she'd get on or stay. But one thing she knew, clearer than ever, she was no longer the girl who'd been laughed at that morning. She was still Clara. But also Clara, the girl who made an entire train station fall silent with just one song. In this city, she was just a tenant in a small third-floor room with an old keyboard and a few music books. On her free days, she taught music to kids in the neighborhood, and the rest of the time, she rode the trains, playing in public spaces, not to be noticed, but simply because she couldn't not play. But that afternoon, after the brief performance at the station, Clara left quietly, thinking it was just another passing moment, one that would fade into memory like so many before. She had no idea the video taken by the young reporter had already begun spreading like wildfire across dry grass. By the next morning, her phone was buzzing nonstop, messages from former students, old friends she hadn't heard from in years, even the owner of the music shop she frequented. Clara, you're online now. Thousands of shares. People are asking who you are. A friend sent her a link. Clara opened it and saw herself in the middle of a noisy train station, her voice filling the air in a 3-minute video, applause ringing out at the end. The caption above was simple. When a heart truly loves music, it can make the whole world stop. She sat in silence for a long time, not because she wasn't happy, but because Clara had never imagined that her music, simple, unpolished, without a stage, could reach people so deeply. She'd always believed her songs were too plain, too everyday to be considered valuable. But now, thousands of comments were pouring in, people thanking her, people saying they cried, amateur musicians inviting her to collaborate, a small record label reaching out to discuss a possible demo. It was all a little overwhelming for Clara. At the same time, something unexpected happened. The businessman, the one who had once mocked her, was the first to reach out, inviting her to a private meeting through his assistant. When Clara received the invitation, she said nothing. She wasn't angry at him, but she wasn't ready to face him either. That man had once made her feel small and foolish. Was he only changing his tone now because of the crowd's applause? Or was this just another form of pity, a way to embrace her so he could seem generous? That night, Clara walked into her small apartment, turned off the lights, and sat alone by her keyboard. In the dim light, she placed her hands on the keys but didn't play a note. She just sat there, remembering all the chances she had let pass by, out of fear, out of shame, because of all the dismissive looks she'd endured. And now, with everything suddenly flipped, she wasn't sure what was real and what was just a fleeting wave. She remembered something her grandmother once told her. When you light a fire, people will come close, some to warm themselves, some with a bucket of water. The media began calling her name. A local newspaper wrote, "Street musician shakes up social media." A radio station wanted her to speak. But inside, Clara still felt uncertain. She wasn't chasing fame. What she wanted was to live with music, without being looked down on, without being told to leave train stations because she was disturbing the peace. Then one afternoon, while Clara was playing for a few children at the community center, a woman walked in, the same reporter who had filmed the video. She said gently, "I know you don't like noise, but you deserve to know this. That clip has touched millions of people, and you don't need to be a star to have a place in this world. You just need to keep being yourself." Clara bowed her head. It was the first time someone had said that to her without adding weight to it. That night, for the first time in years, Clara went online and created a small page called Clara and the Old Keyboard. She didn't say much, just posted a black and white photo, sitting in the middle of the train station, keyboard on her lap, eyes looking toward where the trains were leaving. The caption beneath was only a few words. "I'm not looking for something big, just a place to play, and not be told to leave." Fame came like a whirlwind. Within days, Clara's name was everywhere, across media platforms, on blogs, in headlines. Invitations flooded her inbox, recording deals, reality show auditions, brand partnerships with instrument companies. One media company even offered her a six-figure contract just to appear in a series of inspirational videos aimed at young people. People told her, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you don't grab it now, it'll pass you by like a midnight train." Clara listened, nodded, thanked them. But inside, she didn't feel excited. She wasn't good at negotiations. She wasn't used to being in front of a camera. She had no idea how to build a personal brand or what optimize engagement even meant. She only knew how to play music. A few days later, she was invited to audition for a major music competition. The audition was held in a sleek high-rise downtown, where every step echoed with high heels and expensive perfume. Clara waited for 3 hours in an ice-cold room, surrounded by sharply dressed young performers, all laughing and talking with confidence. She felt like a fallen leaf in a sea of steel. When her name was finally called, she walked in. No one looked up. 3 judges sat staring at their phones. One sipped coffee. A dry voice said, "Begin." Clara bowed her head, placed her hands on the keyboard, and sang, the same voice that had once hushed a noisy train station. But when she finished, there was no reaction. One judge asked, "Do you have something more trendy? This one's kind of old and sad." Clara thanked them and left. On the train ride home, she sat with her keyboard in her lap, her heart hollow. Not because she was rejected, but because in that moment, she understood. There are places where you simply don't belong, no matter how good you are. And the worst part isn't being dismissed, it's when no one's really listening. That evening, she received a call from the representative of the music company that had offered her a deal. "You just need to sign. We'll handle everything else. All you have to do is sing." Clara asked softly, "Can I sing songs I've written?" There was a slight chuckle on the other end. Later. For now, it's best to stick to the format." She hung up, didn't call back. In the days that followed, Clara felt like she was being swept into a whirlwind, where everyone wanted to help her, but no one asked what she actually wanted. They dressed her in glamorous gowns, suggested makeup styles that would appeal to audiences, and encouraged her to start a TikTok account, live stream every night, and sing catchy clips to keep the algorithm happy. She tried, then stopped. Not because she was against the modern world, but because she felt herself drifting away from what made her music real. Quietness, raw emotion, and unscripted, simple moments. Clara returned to her old apartment, took down the posters people had sent her, packed her keyboard into its case, and sat by the window, staring at the pale violet sky. She thought of the train station. There were no flashing lights, no gold-plated microphones, just a few tired strangers waiting for their train, listening to a melody like a breeze brushing past. It was the first time Clara felt truly understood, not because anyone knew her name, but because they stopped and listened with their hearts. That night, she wrote a handwritten letter to the young journalist, the one who had first filmed her performance. In it, Clara said, "I'm grateful that your video helped my music reach so many. But I don't belong on big stages, and I don't want to become someone I'm not. If I could, I'd simply keep playing, like I did that first day, for anyone who happens to hear and feel it. That, for me, is enough." She folded the letter, sealed the envelope, and felt her chest grow lighter. The next morning, Clara returned to the train station. No crowds, no cameras, just hurried footsteps and announcements echoing over the intercom. She sat down, opened her keyboard, and played an old song. A slow, unpolished tune about trains and people who don't need applause to know they're truly alive. A little girl stopped and asked her mother, "Who is she?" The mother smiled, "Just someone who knows how to play music with her whole heart." Nearly a week after returning to the train station, Clara kept showing up every late afternoon. There were no more urgent phone calls, no packed schedules, no agents urging her to seize the moment. Just her music, the breeze in her hair, and the occasional glance from a passerby. And then, something unexpected happened. That day, just after Clara finished playing Quiet Rivers, a piece she'd written at 17, a middle-aged man stepped forward. He wore a felt hat, a long overcoat, and held a wooden cane. He looked refined, but there was a heaviness in his eyes, like someone who'd weathered a few storms of his own. "Do you remember me?" he asked, his voice low and soft like the final note of the piece she'd just played. Clara looked up, her brow slightly furrowed. Then she realized it was him, the wealthy businessman who once mocked her. The man who had stood in this very station and used cold words to dismiss the dreams she'd carried since childhood. But now, he didn't look arrogant. There was no condescension in his eyes, no trace of superiority, just a man standing quietly in the crowd, looking at her with rare sincerity. "I saw your video," he said, hesitating. "I was wrong." Clara stayed silent. She didn't know what to say. She never imagined he would come back, and certainly not to apologize. "I used to think art was just a waste of time," he continued, "that people like you, poor, unremarkable, could never really make anything meaningful. But you made me think again." He told her that a few weeks ago, after her video went viral, he happened to hear that same song on a sleepless night. When the whole city was quiet and the cars outside sounded like distant sighs, Clara's music played in his ears like a deep, resonant note from the past. He remembered his mother, how she used to play the piano every afternoon. He remembered his childhood, standing quietly by the window, listening to each note rise and fade into the golden, buttery light. His mother had passed away young. After that, he buried himself in work, built skyscrapers, owned luxury cars, but forgot the one thing that had ever brought him peace. "You reminded me of a part of myself I thought had died," he said, his eyes slightly blurred. Clara didn't respond. She simply placed her hands on the keys and began to play again, not to perform, but to share with him a sliver of that long-lost memory. After that day, the man came back, not every day, but often enough for Clara to realize something. Sometimes the things we create from a place of sincerity can travel farther than any marketing campaign. People began retelling Clara's story, not as gossip or scandal, but as proof that quiet conviction and genuine music could still reach the deepest parts of the human soul. One day, Clara received a handwritten letter, rare in the digital age, from a young girl living in a distant rural town. In it, the girl wrote, "I was about to give up music because no one believed I could do anything with it. But after I saw you playing at the station, not caring who praised or criticized you, I didn't feel so alone anymore. I want to learn how to stand strong like you, even if no one's watching." Clara read the letter, folded it gently, and placed it inside her guitar case, right next to the old letter she had once written to the journalist. Every evening, she kept playing, still, not for fame, not for anyone to film or post online, but because she knew, somewhere in the rush of everyday life, there might be a weary soul who needed a song to feel steady again. Someone like that once proud businessman, or a young girl struggling to find a reason to keep going. Clara didn't need a spotlight. She just needed a quiet space, a guitar, and a few hearts willing to truly listen. That afternoon, the train station bustled as usual. People came and went, the soft echo of announcements drifting beneath the high, vaulted ceiling. Clara sat in her usual corner, her guitar resting before her like an old friend. But this time, she didn't play. Today was the last day. Not because she was tired, not because she was discouraged, but because she knew it was time to close this chapter. For months, her music had quietly made its way into people's hearts, those who happened to pass by and those who sought her out. A small article had been written about her, calling Clara a storyteller through music in the midst of life's rush. But what made her smile wasn't the title. It was a handwritten note from a 73-year-old woman. "You reminded me that I once truly loved this life." Clara closed the guitar case, stood up, and bowed, like at the end of a performance. No one clapped, but a little boy leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Mom, I like that lady." And to Clara, that was the warmest applause she could ask for. She left the way she came, in silence, without fanfare. But in that moment, music had worked a quiet miracle. It hadn't changed the world, but it had changed how someone saw the world. And that was enough. At some point in life, we all meet people who don't believe in our dreams. They'll say we're not good enough, not special enough, not marketable. But like Clara, what we need isn't the world's approval. Sometimes, all we need is a small place to be ourselves, to plant a seed of sound or of hope in this life. And if we're patient, that seed will grow. Maybe in a stranger's heart, maybe in someone who once mocked us. But surely it will grow first within us, where music, or whatever it is we love, becomes a tiny light that helps us move forward. We don't need to be famous or stand beneath bright lights. We just need to live honestly, do what we believe in, and let kindness lead the way. Just like Clara did, and just like you, if today you still haven't given up on the thing that quietly makes your heart sing.
Thank you for sitting with me and listening to Clara's story, a small girl in a vast world, carrying within her a song no one could silence. I know life isn't always easy. There are days we have to push forward beneath the weight of doubt through the daily grind of making ends meet. But if today, even for a fleeting moment, you felt your heart soften or stir because of something, hold on to that feeling, because that right there is where hope begins. If you have a dream you haven't yet chased, a love you've left unspoken, or a talent you've been too afraid to share, please don't wait for the world's permission. Just begin, even with the smallest of steps, just like Clara did in that quiet, crowded train station. And if this story touched you, share it with someone else. Who knows? It might be exactly what they need to hear today. I'm Ellie, and I still believe that if just one person each day chooses to live true to what they love, the world will grow a little softer, a little kinder. I'll see you in the next story. And remember, never let go of your own song.